The rain was coming down hard, smacking against the windshield of the dark sedan as it turned onto Maplewood Drive. Inside the car, 17-year-old Maya sat in the back seat, her forehead resting against the cold glass. The houses outside were large and perfect, with manicured lawns and big bright windows that glowed yellow in the gray evening. It was the kind of neighborhood where people didn't lock their doors until after the sun went down. The kind of place where everyone waved hello to anyone driving by. The Reynolds family was just like everyone else on the street. They were the picture-perfect American family. Thomas, Maya's father, was a well-known civil engineer in the town. He was the guy who fixed the bridges and designed the new library. He wore suits to work and always had a firm handshake for the neighbors. Alina, Maya's mother, was the kind of woman who baked cookies for the school bake sale and organized the charity drives. She always had a smile on her face when she was in the grocery store or picking up the kids from practice. But Maya knew the truth. She knew that the house at the end of the cul-de-sac wasn't a home. It was a stage set. Maya pulled her earbuds out, the music cutting off abruptly, leaving only the sound of the tires on the wet pavement and her father's heavy breathing in the front seat. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. Her older brother, Ryan, sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. No one spoke. No one asked Maya how her day at school was, and she didn't offer any information. In this family, silence was a survival skill. Maya looked at the back of her father's head. She could see the vein pulsing in his temple. It was a warning sign she had learned to recognize when she was just a little girl. When that vein throbbed, it meant Thomas was holding back his anger, bottling it up like a shaken soda. Eventually, the cap was going to come off, and whoever was closest was going to get sprayed. Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She just wanted to get to her room. She wanted to lock the door, bury her head under her pillow, and disappear until the next morning. The car slowed down and pulled into the driveway. The garage door opened with a loud groan, revealing the cluttered space inside. As the car pulled in, the light from the garage fixtures made Maya squint. She waited for the car to stop, her hand already on the door handle, ready to bolt. But before the engine was even off, the sound of sirens cut through the noise of the rain in the garage. Red and blue lights flashed against the walls, reflecting off the car's mirrors. Maya froze. Her heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer against her ribs. She looked at Ryan. He looked terrified, his face pale. "Wait, stay in the car," Thomas commanded. His voice was low, dangerous. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Outside, 2 police cruisers had blocked the driveway. Maya watched through the rain-streaked windshield as officers stepped out, their uniforms soaked, their hats pulled low. An officer approached the driver's side window and rapped on the glass with his knuckles. Thomas rolled the window down slowly. "Can I help you, officer?" he asked. His voice had changed completely. The anger was gone, replaced by a tone of polite confusion. He sounded like a concerned citizen, not a man who had been seething with rage just seconds before. "Are you Thomas Reynolds?" the officer asked. "I am." "We have a warrant for the arrest of Ryan Reynolds," the officer said, his voice flat and professional. Maya let out a small gasp that she couldn't suppress. She looked at her brother. Ryan was shaking. He turned to look at his father, his eyes wide with panic. "Dad, do something," his eyes seemed to say. But Thomas didn't look at Ryan. He just stared straight ahead at the garage wall. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look shocked. He looked resigned. He looked like a man who knew this day was coming. "What are the charges?" Thomas asked calmly. "Aggravated assault," the officer replied. "He needs to come with us, sir." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "Assault? Ryan?" Her brother was quiet. He kept to himself. He got good grades. He spent all his time in his room drawing or playing video games. He wasn't violent. He was the last person she would expect to be in trouble with the police. Ryan opened the car door and stepped out into the cool, damp air of the garage. The rain was blowing in, wetting the floor. Maya watched as the officers turned Ryan around and handcuffed him. The clicking sound of the metal ratcheting shut was the loudest thing Maya had ever heard. It echoed in the garage, bouncing off the walls. She expected her mother to scream. She expected her father to yell, to demand to call a lawyer, to defend his son. But Alina just sat there, gripping her purse, staring blankly at the dashboard. And Thomas just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white, as the officers led Ryan toward one of the cruisers. Ryan looked back one last time. He looked at Maya through the rear window of the sedan. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. He looked sorry. And then, just before they pushed him into the back seat of the police car, Maya saw something else. She saw Ryan look at Thomas, and for a split second, the fear in Ryan's eyes was replaced by something else. It looked like hatred. Maya sat in the back seat, paralyzed, as the police cars backed down the driveway, their lights flashing red and blue against the brick face of the house. The rain continued to pour, washing away the tire tracks on the driveway. Finally, Thomas put the car in park and turned off the ignition. The silence returned, but it was heavier now. It was a suffocating silence. Alina turned around in her seat to face Maya. Her eyes were dry, but her face was tight. She didn't ask Maya if she was okay. She didn't offer her motherly comfort. Instead, she looked at Maya with a sharp, calculating stare. "Maya," Alina said, her voice trembling slightly. "You didn't see anything in the car? You didn't hear us talk? You don't know anything about Ryan's friends? You understand me?" Maya blinked, confused. "Mom? What are you talking about?" "Ryan doesn't have any friends." "Just shut up, Maya," Thomas snapped from the front seat. The politeness from earlier completely vanished. "Your mother is telling you what to do. You keep your mouth shut. We are a family. We handle this ourselves. We don't talk to outsiders." Maya shrank back into the leather seat. It wasn't about Ryan, she realized. It wasn't about keeping Ryan out of trouble to save him. It was about keeping the secret. It was about protecting the image. They weren't worried about Ryan going to jail. They were worried about what people would find out if they started looking too closely at the Reynolds family. Maya looked at her parents, really looked at them, and for the first time in her life, she didn't see a mother and father. She saw two actors who were terrified of the curtain coming down. She saw the terror in her mother's eyes, and it wasn't fear for her son. It was fear of exposure. The rain battered the roof of the garage, a relentless drumbeat that matched the racing of Maya's heart. She knew then that her life was never going to be the same. The perfect little bubble they lived in had just been pierced. And she was the only one who seemed to realize that the air was leaking out fast. 2 months had passed since the night the police lights flashed in the driveway, but for Maya, it felt like 2 years. The house was quieter now, almost suffocatingly so. Without Ryan there, the empty spaces felt bigger, and the tension between her parents felt sharper. Ryan was sitting in a juvenile detention center waiting for his trial, and the Reynolds house had turned into a fortress. The blinds were always drawn, the phones rang, less and less. The neighbors still waved when they saw Alina at the grocery store, but they didn't stop to chat as long as they used to. Maya could feel them watching, their eyes lingering a little too long on the curtains, wondering what really went on behind the perfect brick facade. Thomas was working later than ever, using his job as an excuse to stay away from the heavy silence of the house. While Alina spent her days cleaning rooms that were already spotless, Maya was trying her best to be invisible. She went to school, sat in the back of the class, and came straight home. She didn't hang out with friends anymore. She was too embarrassed to tell anyone that her brother was in jail for assault. And she was too terrified to say what she really thought, that he wasn't a bad person. Just a broken one. Everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon. Maya was in her bedroom, ostensibly doing homework, but actually just staring at a blank page in her notebook. The doorbell rang, a sharp, cheerful sound that seemed out of place in the gloomy house. A few moments later, she heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Her heart rate spiked. Her father never came up to her room unless there was trouble. Maya stood up as her bedroom door swung open. It wasn't her father. It was a stranger, a tall man in a gray suit, holding a brown envelope. "Maya Reynolds?" the man asked. She nodded, clutching her hands together. "Yes, I'm a process server," the man said. He didn't smile, but his voice wasn't mean. He just looked like he was doing a job he'd done 1,000 times. He held out the envelope. "You've been served." He handed her the paper, turned around, and walked back down the hall. Maya stood frozen in the middle of her room, the heavy envelope burning in her hand. She knew what it was before she even opened it. She had seen enough TV shows to know. It was a subpoena. She was being ordered to go to court. She was being ordered to testify against her own brother. That evening, the dinner table was a battlefield of silence. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware against china. Maya pushed her peas around her plate, her stomach in knots. She knew she had to tell them. "I got served today," Maya said quietly. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded small and thin. Her father stopped chewing. He didn't look up at her. He just stared at his plate. Alina dropped her fork, the metal clattering loudly against her plate. "What?" Alina asked, her voice high and tight. "A man came to the house," Maya said, keeping her eyes on her food. "I have to go to court. The prosecutor wants me to testify." Thomas put his knife and fork down slowly. He took a sip of water, swallowed, and then looked at Maya. The look in his eyes made her blood run cold. It wasn't anger. It was calculation. "About what?" Thomas asked. "I don't know," Maya lied. "I guess about Ryan, about what happened." "You don't know anything," Thomas said. His voice was low, vibrating with that old familiar threat. "You weren't there. You were here." "The paper says I have to answer questions," Maya whispered. "Then you answer them the way we tell you to," Alina snapped. She reached across the table and grabbed Maya's wrist, her grip hard and painful. "Do you understand? You are not going up there to spill our family's business to a bunch of strangers." That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted from silent to hostile. Maya sat on the edge of her bed, waiting. She knew they were coming. Around 10 p.m., her bedroom door opened without a knock. Alina walked in, and Thomas followed, closing the door behind them. This was the intervention, the strategy meeting. It wasn't about justice. It was about damage control. Alina sat down next to Maya on the bed. She didn't wrap her arm around her daughter. She leaned in close, her face inches from Maya's. "Listen to me, Maya," Alina whispered, her breath smelling of mint and wine. "The prosecution is going to try to make Ryan look like a monster. They are going to say he is violent, that he is crazy. If they do that, they might send him away for a long time. But worse, they might start looking at us. They might start looking at this house." Maya looked past her mother to her father, who was standing by the door with his arms crossed. "We don't want that," Alina continued. "So when they ask you questions, you tell them we are a happy family. You tell them Ryan was just having a hard time at school. You tell them we love him and we supported him." "But that's not the truth," Maya said, her voice trembling. "Dad yells all the time. Ryan was scared that night." "Ryan is confused," Thomas said from the doorway, his voice like a whip. "And you are confused if you think you can walk into that courtroom and talk about things you don't understand. It's just a story." "Maya," Alina said, stroking Maya's hair. But the touch felt possessive, not loving. "We are telling a story to keep the family together. If you tell them the truth, if you tell them about the shouting or the fear, they will take you away from us. Do you want to go into foster care? Do you want to live with strangers?" Maya shook her head violently. The thought of being taken from her home, as terrible as it was sometimes, terrified her. She was 17. She didn't want to start over. "Then you do what we say," Alina said firmly. "You go in there, you smile, and you say we are a happy, normal family. Ryan made a mistake. End of story." Her parents left the room then, leaving the door open just a crack, as they always did, to listen. Maya lay down on her bed and stared at the ceiling. The moonlight cast shadows across the room that looked like bars. She thought about Ryan. She thought about the way he used to flinch when their dad walked into the room. She thought about the soundproof door in the basement, the room where the bad things happened, the room her parents pretended was just for storage. The prosecution didn't know about that room. They didn't know about the system of fear and control that ran the house. Her parents weren't telling her to lie to save Ryan. They were telling her to lie to save themselves. They were terrified that if Maya opened her mouth, the floodgates would open and all their secrets would wash away. They were using her as a shield, human barrier between the world and the dark truth of the Reynolds family. Maya pulled the covers up over her head, trying to block out the images in her mind. She had always been afraid of her father, but tonight, as she clutched the subpoena in her hand under the blanket, she realized she was afraid of something else. She was afraid of the truth. She held the power to destroy her family in her hands, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to pull the trigger. She cried silently into her pillow, so her parents wouldn't hear, knowing that tomorrow she would have to wake up and practice the lie again. The day of the trial arrived under a sky the color of old iron. Maya stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, smoothing down the skirt of the only formal dress she owned. It was a plain navy blue dress that her mother had bought for a funeral 2 years ago. It felt appropriate, she thought, staring at her reflection. She wasn't just going to a courthouse. She felt like she was going to a funeral for the life she used to know. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to grip the edge of the dresser to steady herself. Downstairs, she could hear the heavy click of her father's dress shoes on the hardwood floor. He sounded like a soldier marching to war. Her mother was in the kitchen, frantically checking her purse for the 10th time, making sure she had her tissues and her lipstick. Maya. "Let's go." Thomas called up the stairs. His voice didn't sound angry, but it was sharp, like a dog whistle that only she could hear. It was the sound that meant, "Don't embarrass me." Maya took one last deep breath, grabbed her small cardigan, and walked out of her room. As she passed Ryan's bedroom door, she paused. It was closed, just as it had been for 2 months. There was a dusting of police tape still stuck to the corner of the doorframe, peeling slightly. She wanted to open it, to smell his room, to feel close to him, but she knew her father was watching from the bottom of the stairs. She hurried down. The car ride to the courthouse was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the usual heavy tension at home. This silence was electric. Maya sat in the back, clutching her purse, while her parents sat in the front. Every time they stopped at a red light, Alina would turn around and check Maya's face. "You look pale," Alina whispered. "Put on some blush. You look sick. If you look sick, the jury will think something is wrong." "I am sick, Mom," Maya said quietly. "I'm nervous." "Don't be nervous. Just stick to the script," Alina said, turning back around. "We are a happy family. Ryan had a bad week. That's it." When they arrived at the county courthouse, the building loomed over them like a giant stone beast. There were steps everywhere and pillars that reached up to the gray sky. Maya felt very small walking between her parents. Thomas held his head high, nodding to people he recognized, acting as if he were just there for a meeting and not to watch his son possibly go to prison for years. Inside, the air smelled like old paper, floor wax, and fear. The security checkpoint was a nightmare. Maya had to take off her belt and her shoes, and she felt exposed as she walked through the metal detector. When she gathered her things, she saw a woman in a suit standing on the other side of the roped-off area. She had a badge clipped to her jacket. It was the prosecutor. The prosecutor didn't smile at Maya's parents. She just looked at Maya, her eyes soft but searching. Maya quickly looked away, terrified that her father would see her making eye contact with the enemy. They entered the courtroom. It was smaller than it looked on TV, but much scarier. The ceiling was high, with a large fan spinning slowly above. At the front was the judge's bench, raised up high like a throne. In the middle of the room were the tables where the lawyers would sit. And on the side was the witness stand, a lonely chair with a microphone in front of it. Looking like a trap waiting to snap, Maya sat in the wooden pew behind the defense table. Her father sat right next to her, his leg touching hers, a physical reminder that he was there, watching. A few minutes later, a side door opened, and 2 guards brought Ryan in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands and feet shackled. He looked thinner than when he left, his hair longer, his face pale. He scanned the room, his eyes skipping over the prosecutor, the judge, and then landing on the gallery. When he saw Maya, his face softened for a second, just a fraction. Then he looked at his father, and his face went hard again. Maya wanted to wave or mouth "I love you," but she didn't dare. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, feeling like a traitor. The trial started slowly. The judge read out a bunch of legal words that Maya didn't fully understand. Then, the prosecutor began calling witnesses. They called the police officers who arrested Ryan. They called the boy Ryan had hurt. The boy had a bandage on his nose and a sling on his arm. He told the court that Ryan had just attacked him for no reason, that he was a psycho. Maya flinched every time they said that word. Psycho. Ryan wasn't psycho. He was hurt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bailiff walked over to where Maya was sitting. "The court calls Maya Reynolds to the stand," the bailiff said. Maya's legs felt like lead. She stood up, and her father gave her a sharp nudge forward. She walked to the front of the room, her footsteps echoing on the wood. She stepped up into the witness box and sat down. The bailiff held out a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Maya whispered. Her voice trembled, and the microphone amplified the shake. Making it sound like a rumble in the quiet room, the defense attorney stood up. He was a man her parents had hired, a man with a fancy suit and a confident smile. He walked up to the stand, but he didn't stand too close. He treated Maya gently, like a fragile doll. "So, Maya," he started, "you love your brother, don't you?" "Yes," she said. "And you love your parents?" "Yes. Tell us about your home life. Is it a happy home?" Maya looked over at her parents. Her mother was leaning forward, her eyes wide. Her father was staring at her, unblinking. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes," she said. "We are a normal family." "Did you ever see your brother act violent before?" Maya hesitated. She remembered the fights. She remembered Ryan punching the wall in the basement. But that wasn't the story she was supposed to tell. "No," she lied. "He was always quiet." The defense attorney smiled. "Thank you, Maya. No further questions." Maya let out a breath. She felt like she had been holding for hours. She thought she was done. She thought she had survived. But then the prosecutor stood up. She didn't smile. She walked slowly toward the witness stand, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She picked up a file and rested it on the rail of the box. "Maya," the prosecutor began. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight to it. "You testified that your brother was never violent. But I have a report here from a school counselor when you were 12. It says you came to school with a bruise on your arm. You told the counselor it happened during a game of basketball. Was that the truth?" Maya's heart stopped. She looked at her father. He was gripping the wood of the bench in front of him so hard she thought it might splinter. "I don't remember," Maya stammered. "Let me refresh your memory," the prosecutor said. "The report says that Ryan told the counselor the bruise happened because your father threw a book at him and you tried to block it." A gasp went through the courtroom. Maya felt the blood rush to her face. "Did Ryan say that?" the prosecutor asked. "I don't know," Maya said, tears pricking her eyes. The prosecutor stepped closer. "Maya, we aren't here to talk about basketball. We are here to find out why," Ryan snapped. "The night of the assault, the victim told police that Ryan was screaming, not him." "Not him? Does that mean anything to you?" Maya started to cry silently. She couldn't speak. She just shook her head. The prosecutor looked at the judge. "Your Honor, may I approach the witness?" The judge nodded. The prosecutor walked right up to the railing, lowering her voice so only Maya could hear. But the silence in the room was so deep it felt like she was shouting. "I know you're scared, Maya," she said softly. "I know what it's like to be the smallest person in the room and have everyone telling you what to say. But look at me." Maya looked up. The prosecutor's eyes were kind. "You aren't here for them. You're here for Ryan. And if you let him take the fall for this, he is going to be gone for a very long time. And whatever happens in that house, it's going to happen to you next." The prosecutor pulled back. "Let me ask you one more time. Is your brother a violent person? Or is he a violent person because of the house he lives in?" Objections flew from the defense table. Lawyers shouting about leading the witness in speculation, but the judge overruled them. "The witness may answer," the judge said. Maya looked at Ryan. He was staring at her, tears streaming down his face, shaking his head slightly. as if telling her it was okay to lie, to save herself. But then she looked at Thomas, and for the first time, she didn't see the giant, the monster, the man who controlled her life. She just saw a man who was sweating. She saw his hands shaking. He wasn't angry anymore. He was terrified. Maya took a deep breath. The courtroom spun. She knew that whatever she said next would end her life as she knew it. She could be the good daughter, or she could be the good sister. She couldn't be both. She leaned into the microphone, her tears dripping onto the wood. "He wasn't trying to hurt that boy," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "Who was he trying to hurt, Maya?" The prosecutor asked gently. Maya closed her eyes. "He was trying to stop him." The silence that followed Maya's whisper was heavier than any silence she had ever heard in her life. It wasn't just quiet. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum that pulled at her chest. She could hear the buzzing of the overhead lights and the shuffling of papers. But no one spoke. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Miss Reynolds, you need to speak up. Who was he trying to stop?" Maya gripped the wooden rail of the witness stand until her knuckles turned white. She felt dizzy, like she was standing on the edge of a very tall cliff. If she jumped, there was no going back. She looked out into the audience. Her mother was covering her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with horror. But her father wasn't looking at her with anger anymore. He was looking at her with a look of pure, frozen panic. For the first time in 17 years, the man who controlled everything in her world looked small. "He was trying to stop him," Maya said, her voice gaining strength, trembling but loud enough to be heard by the jury box. "He was trying to stop our dad." The courtroom erupted. It wasn't a loud explosion, but a collective murmur that swept through the room like a wind. Reporters in the back row started typing furiously on their laptops. The prosecutor dropped her pen, and the defense attorney stood up quickly, shouting objection. "Speculation. Your Honor, I move for a mistrial based on this unforeseen accusation." "Order." The judge banged his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "I will have order in this court. Ms. Reynolds, you are under oath. You are making very serious accusations. Do you understand that?" "Yes," Maya said. She felt tears streaming down her face, hot and fast, but she didn't wipe them away. "I understand." The prosecutor stepped forward, holding up a hand to silence the defense attorney. "Your Honor, I would like to request a brief recess to speak with the witness regarding this new line of testimony." "Denied," the judge said sharply. He looked at Maya, his face stern. "The people deserve to hear the truth. Miss Reynolds, please continue. Tell us what happened the night of the assault." Maya took a deep, shaky breath. She closed her eyes for a second and saw the basement in her mind. She smelled the musty odor of the old carpet. She heard the heavy lock clicking shut. The night Ryan fought that boy at school. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about a girl, Maya said, opening her eyes and looking directly at the jury. Ryan was in the hallway. The other boy. He was teasing Ryan. He said something about how Ryan always wore long sleeves, even in the summer. She paused. The room was so still now that you could hear a pin drop. The boy said, "I bet your dad beats you," Maya continued. "And Ryan?" Ryan just snapped. He wasn't fighting because he was mean. He was fighting because he was scared. The boy was right. From the corner of her eye, Maya saw her father stand up. "That's a lie," Thomas yelled, his face turning a dark shade of red. "Sit down, Maya. You don't know what you're saying." "Mr. Reynolds," the judge shouted, pointing a gavel at him. "You will be silent, or I will hold you in contempt of court and have you removed. Sit down now." Thomas sat down slowly, defeated by the authority of the court. He glared at Maya with a look that promised a terrible punishment later, but Maya didn't care anymore. The secret was out. The lock was broken. "Maya," the prosecutor asked gently, guiding her back to the story. "What happened in your house that made Ryan so afraid?" Maya looked down at her hands. "My dad. He has a room. In the basement. It's soundproof. He said he built it for a workshop, but there are no tools in there." She looked up, her eyes pleading with the room to understand. When we were bad, or when he just had a bad day, he would take us down there. One at a time. He called it thinking time. But it wasn't thinking time. It was... She struggled to find the words. The memories of the dark room making her throat tight. It was punishment. He would lock us in there for hours. Sometimes days. He would yell at us through the door. He would say we were worthless. He would say we were lucky he even kept us. A sob escaped her throat, but she pushed on. The night Ryan got arrested. The night the police came. That wasn't the first time he fought back. A few days before, Dad had taken me to the room. I was scared. Ryan tried to stop him. Ryan stood in front of the door and wouldn't let Dad put me in. They got into a fight. That's where Ryan got the bruises the police asked about. Not from bullies at school. From his dad, the prosecutor walked over to the defense table and picked up a photo of Ryan that showed his bruised face. You are saying these injuries were inflicted by your father? Yes, Maya said. And the fight at school? Ryan started it because the other boy threatened to tell the principal about the room. Ryan knew that if the principal found out, Dad would lose it. He would lose his job, his reputation. Ryan wasn't trying to protect himself. He was trying to protect Dad. She looked at Ryan, who was weeping openly in his chair, his head in his hands. He was protecting the monster because he was scared of what would happen if the monster got angry. But I'm not scared anymore. The prosecutor walked over to the judge's bench and handed him a folder. Your Honor, based on this testimony, I would like to enter into evidence a search warrant for the Reynolds family residence, specifically the basement. We have reason to believe there is a crime scene. The judge looked at the folder, then at Thomas, who was staring at the floor. This is highly irregular, the judge said, his voice grave. However, the testimony provided by a minor under oath creates probable cause. I am granting the request. Sheriff, dispatch a unit to the Reynolds residence immediately. The court adjourned for a short break, but Maya didn't move. She sat in the witness stand, feeling like she had just run a marathon. Her mother walked up to the rail separating them. Maya braced herself for the yelling, for the insults. Instead, Alina looked old. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Why, Maya? Alina whispered, her eyes sad. We were a family. We were going to get through this. No, Mom, Maya said, her voice soft but final. We were prisoners, and I just let us out. When they returned to the courtroom later that afternoon, the atmosphere had completely changed. It was no longer a simple assault trial. It was a crime scene investigation. The lead detective took the stand to report what the police had found in the Reynolds basement while the court was in recess. The pictures he projected onto a screen for the jury were terrifying. They showed the heavy steel door with the multiple locks. They showed the small, windowless room inside. There was no bed, only a thin mattress on the concrete floor. There were scratches on the inside of the door, made by fingernails, and on the walls, in faint, desperate writing, were measurements of height and dates, marking how long someone had been kept there. Maya couldn't look at the screen. She just listened to the gasps of the jury and the sobbing of a woman sitting behind her stranger, who had come to watch the trial. The prosecutor stood up one last time as the sun began to set through the high windows. Your Honor, the state requests that all charges against Ryan Reynolds regarding the assault at school be dropped in light of these findings. We believe this was a clear case of self-defense and a cry for help from an abused child. Furthermore, the state is immediately filing charges against Thomas Reynolds for false imprisonment, aggravated child abuse, and endangerment of a minor. Thomas didn't even wait for the gavel to bang. He stood up, his face purple with rage, and lunged toward Maya across the divider. You ruined everything, he screamed, his hands reaching out. Order. Bailiff. The judge roared. 2 officers tackled Thomas before he could reach Maya, forcing him to the ground and handcuffing him right there in the courtroom. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the same sound Maya had heard when Ryan was arrested. But this time, the sound didn't scare her. It sounded like safety. As they dragged Thomas out of the room, the courtroom was in chaos. But Maya just sat there, finally breathing. She looked at Ryan. The judge had granted him bail pending the new investigation, and he was being uncuffed. He looked tired, broken, and free. The hearing ended. Maya walked out of the witness stand and into the aisle. Her mother was being questioned by detectives, looking confused and lost, refusing to believe the evidence. But Ryan was waiting for her. He was wearing the orange jumpsuit, but his hands were free. He pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in her life, Maya didn't flinch at a sudden movement. She buried her face in his shoulder, and they just held on to each other while the reporters shouted questions and the flashbulbs went off around them. "You did it." Ryan whispered into her hair. "You saved us," No, Maya said, pulling back to look at her brother. "We saved each other." They walked out of the courthouse together, past the cameras and the noise. They walked out into the cool evening air, leaving the dark secrets behind them, walking toward a future that was scary and uncertain, but finally, truly their own. The weeks that followed the trial were a blur of motion and noise, but eventually the storm settled. The media trucks that had camped out on the streets slowly drove away, looking for the next big story. The police tape was removed from the front door of the brick house on Maplewood Drive. The locks were changed, and the for sale sign was hammered into the lawn. A stark white rectangle against the green grass. Maya and Ryan weren't going back there, of course. They couldn't. That house was no longer a home. It was a graveyard of memories, a place where the walls held the echoes of screaming and the silence of fear. Instead, they found themselves in a different kind of place, a group, home on the other side of town. It wasn't a house with manicured lawns and a two-car garage. It was a plain beige building with a chain-link fence around the backyard. There were rules posted on the refrigerator in the kitchen, and there were other kids there. Kids who had scars on their wrists and stories in their eyes that were just as heavy as theirs. It was strange and foreign. But there was one thing that made it different from the house. On Maplewood Drive, it was safe. The first night was the hardest. Maya lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling of the small room she shared with Ryan. He was asleep in the bed across the room, his breathing rhythmic and deep. For so long, sleep had been something she feared, a time when nightmares could catch her. She was always waiting for the heavy footsteps in the hallway, for the door to fly open, for the shouting to begin. But as she listened to the crickets chirping outside, the open windows, something she had never heard before, over the of the air conditioning at her old house, she realized something. The heavy footsteps were never coming back. Thomas was in jail. He wasn't going to come home at 6 o'clock angry. He wasn't going to unlock the basement door. He was gone. It took a long time for the truth of that to sink in. It was like a wound that ached even after it was bandaged. The fear was a habit, a reflex that she had to unlearn. Ryan had a harder time adjusting than Maya did. He carried the weight of the Big Brother label, a burden that had turned into guilt. He blamed himself for not protecting Maya sooner. He spent hours sitting on the front porch of the group home, smoking cigarettes he wasn't supposed to have and staring at nothing. One afternoon, a few months after they had moved in, a social worker named Ms. Lewis came to visit. She was a kind woman with kind eyes who didn't take notes behind a clipboard like the other social workers. She just sat with them. "The court has finalized the plea deal," Ms. Lewis said gently. She was looking at Ryan. "Ryan, regarding the assault at school. Because of the testimony about the abuse, and because of the condition of your father, the judge has agreed to a deferred sentence. You won't go to juvenile detention." Ryan looked up, his eyes wide. "I won't." "No," Ms. Lewis said. "But there are conditions. You have to complete a counseling program. You have to finish high school. And you have to stay out of trouble." "I can do that," Ryan said, his voice cracking. "I can definitely do that. Your mother," Ms. Lewis continued, her voice dropping an octave. "She has accepted a plea deal as well. She won't go to prison, but she has pleaded guilty to neglect and failure to report abuse. She is going to be required to undergo extensive psychiatric evaluation and counseling. She won't be allowed to have custody of you two for a very long time, maybe never." Maya felt a pang in her chest when she heard that. She hadn't seen her mother since the day in the courtroom. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, wondering if she would feel relief or anger. It wasn't either, exactly. It was just a hollow, sad feeling. Her mother wasn't a monster like Thomas. She was just someone who was too weak to stop one. She had chosen her husband over her children, and now she had lost them both, Maya whispered. That's okay. Life settled into a new rhythm. Maya went to a new high school. It was bigger than her old one, and nobody there knew who she was. She wasn't the daughter of that engineer guy, or the sister of the kid in jail. She was just Maya. At first, she kept her head down, terrified of making friends or letting anyone in. But slowly, she started to open up. She joined the art club. She started carrying a sketchbook again, filling the pages with drawings that weren't dark or scary anymore, drawings of the sky, of trees, of hands that were open and reaching out. She started seeing a therapist, Dr. Evans, twice a week. Dr. Evans was an older man with a soft voice and a messy office. He never forced her to talk about the basement. Instead, he talked about the future. You have control now, Maya, he told her during one session. You are the author of your own story now. You get to decide what happens next. That was a scary thought, but it was also an exciting one. A year passed. The seasons changed. The leaves fell, the snow came, and then the spring brought new flowers. Maya turned 18. The group home threw her a small party with a store-bought cake. It wasn't fancy, but when she blew out the candles, she made a wish. And for the first time in her life, the wish wasn't for safety. It was for happiness. Ryan was doing better too. He had finished his counseling program and was working part-time at a local auto repair shop. He came home with grease on his hands and a smile on his face, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He was learning how to be a kid again, even though he was technically an adult. They saved their money little by little, putting it into a jar they kept hidden in the back of their closet. One Saturday, Maya and Ryan took the bus across town. It was a long ride, but they needed to go. They needed to see it with their own eyes. They got off at the stop near their old neighborhood. It felt strange to walk down those streets again. The houses looked the same, but to Maya, they seemed smaller, less imposing. The sky was just as blue, the grass just as green, but the magic spell that had made this place seem perfect was broken. They stopped at the end of the cul-de-sac. The brick house was empty. The for sale sign had a sold sticker slapped across it. There were moving boxes on the porch, and a family was moving in, a young couple with a golden retriever and a little girl who was chasing a butterfly in the front yard. Maya watched them. The little girl was laughing. She didn't look scared. Do you hate it? Ryan asked, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets. He was looking at the house with a mix of hatred and sorrow. Maya watched the little girl run in circles, free and happy. She thought about the dark room in the basement, the terror that had lived there. She thought about the night she stood on the witness stand and broke her family apart to save her brother. No, Maya said, surprising herself. I don't hate it. It's just a house. It's just bricks and wood. The bad things are gone. They can't touch us anymore. She reached over and took Ryan's hand. It was a simple gesture, something they hadn't done since they were little kids. His hand was rough and calloused from the mechanic shop, but it was warm and steady. Let's go, Maya said. Where? Ryan asked. Anywhere. Just not here. They turned their backs on the house, on the perfect lawn, on the past. They walked toward the bus stop, leaving the shadows behind them. The sun was warm on their faces. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and possibility. They didn't have a fancy house. They didn't have their parents. They didn't have a lot of money. But as they sat on the bus bench, waiting for their ride back to their real life, Maya looked at Ryan and knew they had everything that mattered. They had the truth. They had each other. And for the first time in their lives, they had a future. The bus pulled up, the doors hissing open with a loud sigh. Maya stood up, adjusting the strap of her bag. She stepped onto the bus, Ryan right behind her. She didn't look back at the cul-de-sac again. She looked forward, toward the front of the bus, where the road stretched out long and wide, taking them somewhere new. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would still be hard days. There would still be nightmares. There would still be therapy appointments and moments of doubt. But the courtroom testimony had done its job. It had exposed the dark secret, letting the light in. And the light, Maya decided, was much better than the dark.